Not every silence is pride. Not every refusal is arrogance. Sometimes, behind what people call strange behavior lies a wound too deep to show. This story teaches us not to judge others too quickly, for we may not know the battles they are fighting inside. In the village of Makanda, there lived a woman named Naledi. She was 29 years old, with skin dark as rich soil and eyes that held secrets. Naledi was known for one thing above all others: she never danced at weddings. Every Saturday, when drums called the village to celebrate new unions, Naledi would come dressed in her finest cloth. She would sit with the women, share food, and offer gifts to the bride. But when the music started and bodies began to move, Naledi remained still as stone. The other women would pull at her hands. "Come, sister, dance with us," they would call. But Naledi would shake her head with a gentle smile and stay seated. Village tongues are never quiet, and soon whispers followed Naledi wherever she went. At the market, women would stop talking when she passed. By the river where they washed clothes, conversations would change. "She thinks she is too good for us," said Keisha, a woman with 3 daughters. "Maybe she believes no man here is worthy of her," added Fatu, nodding her head with certainty. "Why does she come to weddings if she will not join the joy?" wondered Aisha, the baker's wife. But Naledi heard nothing. Or if she did, she gave no sign. She moved through the village like a quiet river, calm on the surface but carrying deep currents beneath. When Tebogo, the chief's youngest daughter, announced her engagement, the whole village buzzed with excitement. The wedding would be the grandest Makanda had seen in years. Drummers from 3 villages would come. The celebration would last from sunset to sunrise. As custom demanded, every woman in the village received an invitation. When Naledi's came, delivered by Tebogo herself, the bride-to-be looked hopeful. "Naledi, I know you will come," Tebogo said. "But this time, will you not dance? Just once. It would make my wedding complete." Naledi touched the young woman's hand gently. "I will be there to celebrate your joy, child. But I cannot dance." Almare watched her daughter prepare for another wedding she would attend but not fully join. At 52, Almare had seen much of life, but her daughter's pain remained a mystery she could not solve. "Naledi, my child," Almare said as she braided her daughter's hair, "it has been years now. When will you let your heart heal?" "Some wounds do not heal, mother. They only learn to be quiet." Amory's hands were still in her daughter's hair. "But you are still young. Life still has so much to offer you." "I have life, mother. I have work, I have family, I have purpose. I do not need to dance to prove I am alive." Kwainkai, the village elder, sat under the great baobab tree as he did every evening. At 70, his eyes had seen many seasons, and his heart understood what others missed. When he saw the women gossiping about Naledi, he called them close. "Listen well," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years. "I see you talking about the woman who does not dance. But tell me, do you mock the tree that bears no fruit because lightning struck it? Do you laugh at the bird that will not sing because hunters took its mate?" The women fell silent. Kwainkai continued, "Stop judging Naledi. Do you laugh at the scar of a man who survived war? Her silence is her scar. Let it remind us that behind every face there is a story." Before the tragedy, Naledi had been different. She was the first to dance at every celebration, her laughter ringing above the drums. Children would copy her moves, and young men would watch in admiration as she spun and swayed with the rhythm. In those days, she danced at harvest festivals, at naming ceremonies, at victories and homecomings. Her feet knew every traditional step, and her body moved like the wind through grass. Dancing was as natural to her as breathing. But that was before. Before the day that changed everything. Before the wedding that was meant to be her own. His name was Seko, and he came to Makanda as a trader from the north. At 33, he was tall and strong, with hands skilled at working leather and a voice that could make children stop crying. When he saw Naledi dancing at a festival, he knew his traveling days were over. For 6 months, he courted her properly. He spoke to her father, brought gifts to her mother, and proved his worth to the village. Naledi had never felt such happiness. When Seko asked for her hand, her yes came without hesitation. They planned a wedding that would bring together both their families. Seko's people would come from the north, bringing their own traditions to mix with those of Makanda. It would be a celebration of love crossing boundaries. The day of Naledi's wedding dawned clear and bright. The village had worked for weeks to prepare. Flowers were gathered, food was cooked, and the compound was decorated with cloth of every color. 3 drummers arrived with instruments that could be heard for miles. Naledi wore white cloth with gold thread, and flowers in her hair. Her beauty that day was spoken of for years after. Seko wore the finest robes his people could make, and his smile could have lit the darkest night. As the sun began to set, guests filled the compound. Both families mixed freely, sharing food and stories. The ceremony was beautiful, blessed by elders from both communities. When it was complete, Naledi was truly Seko's wife. As tradition demanded, the bride and groom led the first dance. The drums began slowly, building in rhythm as more people joined. Naledi moved like liquid grace, her joy visible in every step. Seko, though not born to these dances, followed her lead with loving clumsiness that made everyone laugh. Soon the compound was filled with dancing bodies. Children weaved between adults, old women showed moves they had not done in years, and young men competed to impress the unmarried girls. The air was thick with joy and the sweet smell of palm wine. Lanterns hung from poles to light the celebration as darkness fell. The flames danced with the people, casting moving shadows on the ground. No one noticed how close the flames came to the decorations. It happened so quickly that later, no one could say exactly how. Perhaps a drunk guest stumbled into a pole. Perhaps the wind caught a piece of cloth. But suddenly, a lantern fell into the crowd, and the flame caught the dry decorations. Fire spread faster than thought. Palm wine spilled on the ground caught flame. The raffia mats that covered the ground began to burn. In moments, what had been joy became terror. People screamed and ran in all directions. In the chaos, families were separated. Children cried for parents, parents searched for children. The drummers dropped their instruments and fled. The sweet smell of celebration became the bitter smoke of disaster. Naledi found herself pushed away from Seko in panic. She called his name but could not hear his voice above the screaming. The fire had created a wall between them, growing higher and hotter by the moment. Seko, she cried, trying to push through the fleeing crowd. Seko, where are you? Others grabbed her arms, pulling her to safety. Come, child, you must get out. The fire is spreading. But she fought them, desperate to reach her husband. It was only when strong hands lifted her and carried her away that she stopped struggling. By then, the compound was fully ablaze, and it was too late for anyone still inside. Dawn came gray and sad over the ruins of what had been a celebration. The fire had burned through the night, leaving only ash and the skeleton of the compound. Families counted their members, and the village counted its losses. 7 people had perished in the flames, caught by the fire's speed or overcome by smoke. Among them was Seko, found where he had fallen trying to help others escape. His body was burned beyond recognition, identified only by the wedding ring that had survived the flames. Naledi sat by his body, silent and still. She had not cried, had not spoken since learning of his death. Her wedding dress, once white and gold, was now gray with ash and soot. In the months after the tragedy, Naledi barely spoke. She returned to her mother's house and went through the motions of living. She ate when food was placed before her, slept when darkness fell, and woke when the sun rose. But inside, she felt nothing. When harvest time came, and the village celebrated, Naledi stayed home. When children were named and families danced with joy, she found excuses to be elsewhere. The sound of drums made her chest tighten and her hands shake. Dancing reminded her of the last moments she had been truly happy, the moments before her world burned down. "My daughter," Amare would say, "you must return to life. Seko would not want this for you." But Naledi would only look at her with empty eyes. "The day I danced, I lost everything. I cannot dance again." Years passed, and slowly, Naledi found a way to exist with her pain. She took work weaving baskets, her hands staying busy while her mind stayed quiet. She began to attend some village events, sitting on the edges, participating without fully joining. But weddings were the hardest. The joy of other brides reminded her of her own brief happiness. The drums that should have celebrated love only echoed with loss. Still, she forced herself to go, to give gifts and offer good wishes, even when every moment was torture. People began to notice her pattern. Naledi would come to weddings dressed beautifully, would sit with the women and share in the feast. But when the music started, when feet began to move and bodies began to sway, she would sit like stone, unmovable and unmoved. Not everyone in the village knew Naledi's story. New families had come, children had grown up, and memories faded with time. To them, she was simply the woman who would not dance, proud and strange in her refusal to join the celebration. But some remembered. Some had been there that terrible night, had seen the fire and felt the loss. These ones understood why drums made Naledi's face go pale, why the sight of celebration could bring such sadness to her eyes. Kai was one who remembered. He had helped carry bodies from the ruins, and had seen young love destroyed in flames. When he heard people gossiping about Naledi's pride, he knew he had to speak. The village needed to remember that judgment without knowledge is cruelty. At Tebogo's wedding, as drums filled the air and dancers filled the ground, Naledi sat in her usual place, still and silent. But this time, instead of whispers, there was understanding in the eyes that watched her. Kai had shared her story, not in cruel gossip but in gentle teaching. The village now knew that Naledi's refusal to dance was not pride but protection. Her stillness was not judgment of others but kindness to herself. As the celebration continued around her, Naledi felt something shift. The weight of judgment that had pressed on her shoulders for so long seemed lighter. She was still herself, still the woman who could not dance. But now she was no longer the woman who was misunderstood. When young Tebogo came to sit beside her during a quiet moment, Naledi saw no disappointment in her eyes, only acceptance. "I understand now," the bride said softly. "Thank you for being here anyway. So when you see someone who does not join the crowd, do not rush to judge them. The feet that refuse to dance may carry a pain you will never understand." Naledi's story reminds us that love lost can leave wounds that never fully heal. Not every silence is pride. Not every refusal is arrogance. Sometimes, behind what people call strange behavior lies a wound too deep to show. Before we judge others, we must remember that everyone carries stories we cannot see. Share this story with someone you care about. Subscribe for more African folktales filled with wisdom, and remember, never judge the quiet heart, for it may be carrying the loudest sorrow.